Welcome to Beyond the Reformer, the podcast where those who love Pilates come together for thoughtful conversations, genuine insights, and inspiring stories. I'm your host, Nick Lenny, and through these chats, I hope you feel more connected to our community, more aligned in your purpose, and inspired both in your Pilates journey and beyond. In today's episode, I'm joined by Milena, the founder of Platinum Pilates in Dublin. She brings incredible honesty about what it takes to run a large studio business, and we talk about the pressure of leadership, her passion for continuous learning, and what she's discovered about herself and the industry along the way. I honestly could have talked to her for hours. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Milena, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. It is such a delight to have you here.
Thank you, Nick. It's so great to see you again. And I'm very honored that you asked me to come onto the podcast.
Well, I couldn't not do, really. You are the founder of Platinum Pilates. Am I right? There's 5 studios in Dublin?
We have 5 locations. There's actually 6 studios, in fact, in the 5 locations.
And we're going to talk so much about Platinum because I have been a long time fan. I'd like to begin, though, as I do with all our guests, and it's just, I love hearing people's stories, really. And I'd love to understand your background because am I right in thinking you've got quite a culturally diverse background? Your mum's from Kerry, your dad's from Serbia. Is that right? How has that right. impacted your life, your professional life? Has it brought anything to life?
Do you know what? That's it's a great place to start because I think only in my later years with the experiences that I had in, becoming a Pilates teacher to moving into being a business owner to being a mom that I realized actually that kind of diversity that I'm very lucky to have in my life was very much what created the foundation. I think, my mom's from Kerry. I think anybody from Kerry, and I know that you have roots from the West.
Tralee,
well.
I'm from Tralee. So I saw you on Instagram recently. I'm from Tralee. I left Tralee when I was 7. And then my mum is now back there. So I was there last week. So it's funny, isn't it? How it's a small world.
It is. You understand people from Kerry, they're amazing. They're the most warm, incredible people. They're so strong. They have so much resilience and they're a lot of fun as well. So that was my mom. And then of course my dad is from Belgrade, Serbia. But I was born in Ireland and I was born in Dublin. So those two kind of mixes came together. And I think I really now in my older years appreciate the elements of, my dad, his experience post World War II, coming to the UK, having to learn a whole new language. And he's so intelligent and he's achieved so much in his career. And I used to always think, God, it must have been such a struggle. So I really appreciate that. I think that has given me a lot of, I guess I'm going to use the word, the drive for success, but also the element of resilience and the element of understanding what it's like to, be a stranger, what it's like to come into a completely different culture, to learn a new language, and then also to be able to thrive in that environment.
I don't know how people do it. A friend of mine, she works with a lot of refugees. And I hear these stories and I cannot, can you even imagine? Maybe you can because of your dad, but I can't even imagine leaving my home, going somewhere else, like you said, not speaking the language, completely different culture, even just surviving in that, not to mention thriving. So that must have been a really big influence for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think it's really nice for you to have acknowledged that. I actually see it in the Pilates industry where I work with a lot of my teachers where English isn't their first language. And I would always say to them, I have so much respect for you because not only are, Pilates and this world that we teach in is its own language anyhow, and you're doing it in not your mother's tongue. So I have so much respect for that. But yeah, it's something that sometimes I think we take for granted, and that unless, you really kind of sit back and think, wow, what a struggle. It kind of opens your eyes a little bit.
So before Pilates, was there any other career or have you always been in the wellness and fitness world?
You know what, Nick, I've always been in it. I left school when I was 18 and I was working. I was lucky enough to be actually working, as a part-time cleaning machines in a gym. That was my job. It was like I was the girl who brought them water and a sweat towel. I wasn't even a qualified instructor at that point. So when I was 18, I was in that environment. So I came into that. That was the only industry that I've ever worked in, that I've ever known. And I then, during that process, then went on and trained as a personal trainer. And I found Pilates really, really early on in, like, for I was looking back, I found a certificate. My first ever Pilates certification was in 2001, and it was the Polestar qualification. It was a course that was run actually through David Lloyd and David Lloyd Fulham, and it was some of the really, really early educators. And so that was like 23, 24 years ago. That's kind of where my career started.
Did the first job, the job that you first had, did that kind of come about by chance that it was in that industry, or were you interested in that industry, or is there a little bit of serendipity that you got that and then it kind of opened your eyes up to this world?
Yeah, I mean, when you're 18, I mean, my daughter is 18 now. She's doing her leaving cert at the moment. She has no idea what she wants to do. And if I think back to myself at that time, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I left school, and in Ireland, the system is very much, you put down on your CAO, and it's almost like that's what your career for life is. They're asking the kids these questions, and I had no interest in going to college. I did it all backwards. I didn't want to go to college. I just wanted to get a job, and I wanted to work with people. I was actually a waitress. That was what I loved, like waitressing and serving coffees and having the chats with people. So I was very, very interested in people. And actually, in fact, yeah, it just so happened where I was a waitress, it was in a health club, and then there was a gym, and up I went, and I had a look, and I went, I like the look of this. When I left school, actually, the very first course that I did was, in fact, it was beauty therapy, and we were learning massage, reflexology, that kind of holistic therapy. So I was being sort of introduced to elements of anatomy and physiology. And then, towards the end of that, of course, I saw this gym, and I thought, oh, maybe I should, start working out. And it was kind of organic from there.
I always think it's really interesting, isn't it? How sometimes you get on a path, you have no idea where you're going, and then it takes you on this journey. So you did your personal training. Tell me about your first experience of Pilates then. How did that feel to you? Can you remember that? And then what drove you to do that first training? I mean, it's amazing that it was, like you said, at David Lloyd with those original educators that brought it to the UK.
I did my diploma in personal training with, I guess it was iTech. Then I went on to study with ACSM and NASM. And so they were kind of professional qualifications in personal training. I was really, really interested. A lot of them were state, they were delivered from the States and through the States. So it was fantastic to be able to get slightly larger insight into things like correctional exercise, functional movement at a really early age before anybody was really talking about it. And then I ended up going on a convention in Germany, these fitness conventions where it was a kind of a collaboration, bringing together of all industries. There was spin classes, there was step classes, and there was a room full of reformers, which I accidentally walked into. I wasn't booked into it. I'd never heard of Pilates. And in I went, and there was an educator in there. She was a Polestar educator, and she kind of waved me in. And I was like, I was on the reformer before I knew it. But as soon as I got onto it, I was like, oh my gosh, what is this feeling? That kind of paradox of, okay, I'm really working hard here, but I feel like the reformer is kind of meeting me or supporting me. I feel like it's kind of putting me into the movement. It's putting my nervous system at ease. It's creating this kind of efficiency in my movement, but it's burning and I'm shaking. And I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. But it was lovely. And so I got off the machine and went, that you're gonna need to find out a bit more about this. So I came back to Dublin, and I just, started researching, and there was nothing in Ireland. There was no Pilates teachers, there was no educators, there was no courses. And so I had to kind of look further afield, and completely coincidentally, I was working for David Lloyd, and this course was happening in-house in David Lloyd, and it was a Polestar run course. And when I went there, it was so interesting because the actual setup of that studio, there was reformers, there was chairs, there was all of the kind of the apparatus, but the main studio, I don't know if you remember, I mean, they're not wildly common now, but maybe they are, but the tower units. So they were like the, the long beds, and they're attached to the walls. And that is really where the course happened. That was my first experience of Pilates education. And interesting, Nick, it wasn't the typical, oh my God, I'm hooked. It was actually a little bit of the opposite. I was like, I don't get it. Like, what? This doesn't make any sense to me because, intellectually, I felt like I knew the body. I learned from all the manuals and all the books, and I knew biomechanics. I knew the origins and the insertions, the actions and the antagonists. I knew on paper what I thought was everything about that I needed to know to be a good coach, to be a good trainer. And then I go on this course and they're talking about principles and breath and nervous system and fascia, and I'm like, what? So I actually didn't get it, but I went through the process anyway, and I came back to Dublin then with all of my knowledge, and I was like, oh God, like, and it was a big commitment traveling over and back to the UK, and I felt like I had to persevere and work through it and try and understand it a little bit better. And I did. I worked on it, and we got some reformers in David Lloyd, and I kind of kept exploring, but I felt like I wasn't quite there with it. So I took the stuff that I liked and incorporated that into my personal training skill. But my clients loved that little bit that I was able to bring them. And then I actually went back again and studied. I did like, you'd be amazed. I actually did my comprehensive 3 times, and the second time I went back, it was a totally different experience. I had Alistair was the educator. Diane is a long time friend of mine, and I sat with her on many courses, and then she was a mentor of mine, and then of course she's this amazing educator. So herself and Liz, were very much a part of my journey. But on that second course, that's when I realized, now I know what I don't know. It was like, okay, there is so much more to this movement, to this body of work than meets the eye. It was a very humbling experience, because I was realizing on paper I knew a lot, but actually I didn't understand any of the connections between the systems, and I didn't really understand movement on a much greater level. And I remember having a session with Liz Bussey. We were doing something, and she said, okay, tell me, about the diaphragm, tell me what you feel. And I was banging out, oh, well, it originates here and it inserts here, and this is the action. And she's like, no, but like, what do you feel? Like, what do you feel in your body? And I was like, I don't feel anything. Actually, I'm so disconnected from the knowledge that was in my head to actually what was in my body. And that was probably that moment where I realized, oh, okay, this is so much bigger and deeper than I thought.
The tuning in is the transformational bit, isn't it? It's the conversation I hear with so many of the guests on the podcast, myself, clients. It is that, getting out of your head and getting into your body. I just love hearing your story. I didn't know a lot of this. And I mean, if there was anyone who was guided, Milena, it is you. I mean, there's so many bits to that puzzle. It must be sort of interesting to look at where you are now and think how this came about. So how did it come from, you've done this, you've gone back to Dublin, you're at David Lloyd. How did it come to thinking about opening your own studio?
Do you know what? You're right. And it's funny. I think it's only when you come into conversation like this that you actually get to reflect. We were chatting and I was preparing, and I was like, oh my God, like we're going back to 2000. Like, that's 25 years ago. So I did my second course then, which then of course opened up my mind a whole lot more and helped me to really start to understand how to teach, how to actually teach so that people could feel. And the shift from intellectually knowing exercise, movement, biomechanics, anatomy, physiology, to then actually teaching people to know it for themselves, I think was the kind of the turning point. So when I kind of came back again, and at this point, so we're talking kind of 2004, 2005, still reformer and Pilates in Ireland anyway, still pretty much non-existent. And I was really lucky. There was a GM in David Lloyd at that time who I was kind of operating in the sports and wellness part of that business. And he would go, what's next? What's coming? And I said, I think Pilates is going, I've fallen in love with this movement, and I just think it's going to be huge. But a one-to-one, there isn't, you won't gain enough traction. So I think that you need to buy not one reformer. I think you need to buy a bunch of reformers. I think you need to buy like eight, and we need to open an actual studio. And you got to let me teach this in group. He basically signed off and bought eight reformers for the club. And at the time, actually, Leinster Rugby, who's like our fantastic rugby team, they were based in David Lloyd as their kind of training vicinity. And they had a couple of physios who were coming to me as they were coming to be, training with me. And they came and said, well, would you maybe start taking some of the players and would you work with them? And I was loving that because it meant now I got to have a whole diverse population of clients, athletes, there was people who'd never moved before, there's all these different things. So my world just grew. It was a great opportunity to be able to sort of take what I knew and my teaching skill. Then I suppose it really improved, became more efficient, and I became a better teacher because I was teaching all the time. And Nick, when I tell you, I was working 60 hours a week because it was like it was growing at such a fast rate, but actually there was something that I was feeling. The more I taught, the better I got, and it was this kind of foundational sort of learning. And then, I'd teach something and it wouldn't land quite right, and I'd go back and teach it again. And this constant teaching was allowing me to be able to kind of really refine the skill. And I had a great career. I had an amazing career at David Lloyd. And actually, I would have happily stayed there for probably the rest of my life. I'm wired that way that, I like to know where things are and etc. And of course, the downturn came and there was all sorts of, changes that happened within that organization. And they kind of felt, I'd been there for a very long time. I was probably a very expensive personal trainer, and we parted ways, not because I wanted to. And I was then like, I was a mom. I had two small children with another one on the way. I was unemployed and I was like, oh God, what do I do now? So I didn't have a drive to become a business owner. It wasn't like I was this amazing entrepreneur in any way. I just had a passion for teaching people and for Pilates. My superpower was that. But then I had a need to actually earn a living. I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? I've got to feed these babies and I have to survive. So, I'd seen in kind of a couple of times I'd been to the States, I'd seen that whole soul cycle model where it was like boutique group exercise. And I was like, well, why don't we do that with reformers? I feel like that could be a thing. So in 2010, Platinum Pilates was born in a small, room in this beautiful old church building very near to where I live. And that was it.
And how was the structure of that first off? So you've got small children, baby on the way, you've opened a new studio. Did you have teachers working for you? Did you have a team to support you? Or did you do what I did? It's like just me in a room teaching, hoping people come along.
Exactly. Yeah. In effect, I mean, at the time, it was myself and my ex husband. We were working in it together, and there was nobody else in the sense of we'd know you just taught and kept on. I mean, I was teaching up and probably till 5 days before I'd had Amelia, my youngest, and when I think back now, I feel like I was probably back on the schedule after about 3 weeks. Would have recommended, but it needs must. And, it was really small at first, but actually after it grew so rapidly. And I suppose, Nick, you've got to remember there was no social media whatsoever in 2010. Now, maybe there was, we just weren't on it, but I don't remember having an Instagram. We didn't have an Instagram account. I think there may have been a Facebook, but like it wasn't the same. So the growth was very much organic, word of mouth, clients having a good experience, but it grew very quickly. So very quickly, the studios were fully booked, the schedules were packed out, and we then had to expand and we had to kind of, try call in other teachers. But of course, there was no teachers. It wasn't like there was this big supply of teachers. There was very little education available in Ireland. And so I found myself kind of doing what I did in David Lloyd, where I would work with other personal trainers and I would teach them. I just teach them our ways, like, look, well, this is how it is. So I would mentor them. And that's what I did within Platinum in the early days. We'd have these amazing teachers that would come in and they would be maybe mat work trained or they would be personal trainers. So they would have had the experience, but they didn't have the maybe the opportunities that I had to be able to go and take reformer. So it was very much a kind of a mentorship program. And it wasn't until much later on that education and social media grew the industry very rapidly that we had access to actual certified teachers.
So in the early days, you had the challenges of getting teachers. Were there other challenges that you had around running that first studio?
It's funny. I mean, the challenges around like anything to do with running business. I mean, being a Pilates teacher and being a business owner are like chalk and cheese. It's almost like two completely different careers, because you have the caring, nurturing, wanting to take care of people, and then you have the business model, and you have the okay, we have to have some rules and structures so that this business stays afloat. We have to make sure that we pay our rents, our rates, our revenue. We have to all of those things. And therefore, when it comes to, for example, dealing with clients and laying down foundations and, implementing a cancellation policy with clients that for a very long time and having to say, I'm sorry, but this is the cancellation policy. I found that quite hard because, it was like the caring, nurturing, wanting to take care of people's side and having to move over. And that would probably be the same with staff as well, because as an industry goes, because it was quite small and you become quite close to staff. So you have to be really, look, there's a line and there is boundaries and you have to respect me and I respect you and not graying those kind of, sort of the blurred lines. All of that was a real challenge, I guess, from the outset. The other thing that actually, Nick, I remember now only that we're talking, it's coming to me. I remember that there was a lot of pushback from the physiotherapy industry. I'm not a physiotherapist, but I studied physical therapy, which in Ireland is they're two completely separate careers and industries. Again, like I said, my foundation was very much all biomechanics and taking care of the body. And when we opened, we would have lots of clients, and often they would come and say, I have this thing going on, and do you know of a physiotherapist, or do you know where I could kind of get more care, more help on this? And I was always very respectful of the line of where my job stops and the physio's job starts. So referring to the best possible people. And we would try and set up links with physios, and we would try and refer to people that we knew around the area. And a lot of the time we'd see clients leave and they would never come back. And so I'd follow up and go, how are you getting on? I haven't seen you for a while. Hope everything's okay with that pain or with that thing. And they would often come back and say, well, actually, my physio told me that I should not come to class for a while, that actually reformer's making it worse. And I was like, what, really? And I felt like they didn't understand. There was this big gap in the knowledge of what these physios had learned in their careers, and that if they knew really the experience of it. So that lasted until about 2015. And as our business grew, we had kind of more spaces. And then I kind of thought, do you know what I need to do? I just need to have physio in my business because this does not make sense to me. This gap between, rehab and the work that we're doing, it's too closely linked to not try and build some kind of connection. So that's kind of where the physiotherapy part of the business evolved and grew from. And I still think that it's an amazing opportunity. But thankfully, from kind of that time onwards, from around 2014, the actual physiotherapy industry itself evolved, and I think more and more research started to come out. And of course, physios will be very much, they want the research paper, they want to see it in writing. And thankfully that was starting to evolve, where papers that were saying actually movement is exactly what this particular condition needs.
I mean, you were so ahead of the curve with this, though. It's not surprising that other people were lagging behind. I mean, to think about the time where you were putting reformers into your local David Lloyd, when that's only really happening in the last year now, more widely, that's a big gap. I mean, I remember when I think I first discovered Pilates around that sort of same time. I found out about it actually via a physio, but it was new. No one really knew what it was. It was this kind of weird thing. You got there, it was slow. Like you said earlier, it just didn't make sense. How have you found bringing physio into the business? Does that just feel like the right fit? Because in countries like Australia, Pilates and physiotherapy go hand in hand, like everywhere. And yet here, that's just, even to this day, not really happening. You're one of only a few studios that's doing that. Has it landed well with the clients? Has it landed well as a business venture for you?
I'll be honest, it's really challenging because you're dealing with technically two separate industries. You've got allied health professionals on one hand, and then you've got wellness slash fitness industry professionals on the other hand. You've got one very professional industry, and you've got one, I'm going to say, very unprofessional, unregulated industry. And you try to bring the two of those together with the best of intention. It's not smooth. It's not a smooth transition in any shape or form. And then, of course, you have this whole question mark around clinical Pilates, who is technically allowed to call themselves a clinical Pilates practitioner, because in years gone past, having done Polestar and having done lots more, education on top of it, I would have classified myself as a clinical Pilates practitioner. But, now it would seem that actually clinical Pilates, as recognized by the physiotherapy industry and even by, let's say, by the insurance companies that are covering it, certainly here in Ireland, really clinical Pilates is a practice in this country that is taught by chartered physiotherapists. So you have all this gray area within the business. So it definitely brought a lot of challenges, and it's one that I'm not done with. I'm on a journey with it. And there were times when I thought maybe these two can't meet. Maybe they can't come together. Group Pilates. I mean, are you ridiculous in thinking you can bring these two together? But I'm very passionate about working in the field and having more of a kind of a sort of connection between both of them.
You are a prolific learner. Can I say that? I mean, I don't think I know anybody who's done, I mean, I didn't even know you'd done comprehensive 3 times. You've done gyrotonic, Franklin method. I'm sure there's more. What drives you on? Because these are big commitments. These are big courses. They're time away from your business, from your home. You might be traveling to the UK. What drives you forward? I mean, you've shared a little bit about your love of the body and wanting to learn more, but how do you decide what to do, what to invest in?
Do you know what? You're right. And thank you for saying that. Sometimes I think I'm a bit mad. I'm like, another course. I recently completed a degree in psychology, Nick, which I took on during the pandemic thinking, oh, this would be nice to do. And then I realized, you know what? A year in, I wanted to quit. And then I was like, well, you can't quit now because you've told everybody about it. You've told everyone, so like you're in this until you get that thesis written. So what drives me on, I guess, a huge curiosity. And, when I think about, I started, let's say, as a waitress, where it was like people, I love people. I love this. I love to understand. And, I'm really curious about people, which then led me into the career. But I think wanting to know why is it like that? Why is this the way it is? And I feel like you can never know everything. So you go on a course with a hope or an intention that this course is going to, I don't know, give me some kind of validation. It's going to give me a stamp of approval. Oh, when I complete that course, you're going to have, and then people around me will think, that's how I used to think about courses. And I would go on a course, and every single time I'd go on it, I would go, oh, wow, here's more of what I don't know. It would open up my eyes to another layer or another level of learning. And I think one really interesting thing, and I think it was my experience, where there was a lot of, I found, and I'm sure you did too, Nick, a lot of controversy over what was the best type of Pilates to learn. You have all these different schools. You have people who are calling themselves like, the classical Pilates repertoire. And then you have, oh, well, I'm more contemporary, or I'm one of Joseph's, direct descendants. And all this noise around this amazing technique. And I felt like I had to almost, if I likened it to science, scientists they're never actually proving anything. They're literally taking an idea or a hypothesis, and they're looking at it and they're saying, okay, I'm going to see if I can prove this. I'm going to see if I can provide enough evidence to be able to say that this thing is fact, or is as close to as fact. And they can do that to a point, but science is always evolving. Everything is always evolving. So one piece of research that gets published enough to be able to say, peer reviewed, oh, well, this is now research says this. In 3 or 4 years, there will be another piece of research that discounts that. So there is always going to be this constant evolving in the body, in the human body. And, Pilates is probably one of the most under researched, scientifically researched exercise systems there is. And probably because there's too many variables. Okay, you have a reformer, you have a piece of equipment. Okay, that's a given. But every body that gets onto that reformer, their nervous system interacts differently. Their biomechanics, their personal experience, their fascia, the way that they absorb force, the way they produce force. The variables are so vast that to be ever able to actually create a piece of research that says, oh, reformer Pilates, definitely improves this or improves that. It's not there yet. And I think I went in search of where can I find the most up-to-date information, and it just led me on this kind of trajectory of learning more things. And so I spent a lot of time, I guess, in the Pilates world. So for example, with Poster, where I'd done it 3 times, and then, after that, then or throughout that, actually, I did all lots of other things. As you said, I did some training with Tom Myers on anatomy trains, Gary Carter, and then Eric Franklin. And I'm gonna say Eric Franklin, he was my favorite because he was so crass in his, in his directness of the whole cueing end of things. And as Pilates teachers, we would have picked up these sayings and these nuances, that are your like typical, cues. And he just opened that box and said, well, that's just ridiculous. It's not how you function. So I was really, it led me to be really curious, to continuously ask questions. And I suppose now when I think about, where to invest, I look at it more so from a case of what do I want to get out of this education, rather than just a certificate, a tick the box to say I've done it. What would I hope to actually get from it? What am I going to learn? And the most important thing, what can I then give from it? What am I going to be able to pass on? Because I think you can sit in courses. You can do courses all day, every day. If you don't teach what you've learned, you don't really truly know it. You don't have the ability to be able to say, yeah, I'm an expert in this, or I really know it. So my feeling with anything, and if you were asking me, for advice, or if any of my teachers were asking me for advice, I would say you have to teach to become better. That's actually where the learning starts, when you come off the course and actually you get in and the client is in front of you, or the group of clients are in front. Now you're learning. Now you're making your mistakes. Now you're like, oh my God, do I actually understand this?
I think your clients teach you the most, don't they? And then I guess from that, what you're saying is where you start to see you want to learn more, let that lead you. And also, I think what you said was really interesting is around creating curiosity. Like you've repeatedly talked about that the more courses you did, the more whys that you had. And I really want to instill that in my teachers at the studio I have, in my students, in my teacher training. This is not the gospel according to me. Be curious, like ask questions. Like Eric Franklin said, why are we saying this phrase? What does it mean? Is it helpful? Usually not. I had this conversation with a teacher at my studio who, did a different training. She's a fabulous teacher, but she's still saying these phrases. And, when you ask someone, well, why? A lot of trainings aren't really getting them to think that way, are they? And so it sounds like that's what you've been. You've been very curious about this stuff. And I guess the truth is, the more courses I go on, the more I realize how little I know, in a really lovely way. And that it's not like, sometimes I think people can go on courses and think, well, when I've done this, I will have that confidence. It doesn't really work like that. Like you said, you have to turn up, you have to teach, and you have to be open to when it goes wrong, looking at yourself, changing things, playing with things, because there's nothing like working with a real life person and thinking, well, this landed when I did it with my practice person, but now I'm with this person. She has no idea what I'm trying to get her to do. Why can she not do a rollover? How do I cue that? So I love that. And it's really interesting to hear how that depth has really sort of spearheaded, I guess, has been the foundations to Platinum. Did you have plans to scale? You said that your first studio was just booked, really quickly, which I'm not surprised when people love this stuff, don't they, Milena? Like they love the depth of this work. But once you started to see it grow, was there a place where you like, oh, we could have multiple studios, or did that happen organically?
I think again that happened organically. It happened from a place of, so the first studio was like fully booked and people couldn't get into class, and therefore, people were like, well, I'm just going to go somewhere else. I'm going to have to find an alternative. And I was like, oh no, I don't really want that. I want to not keep the clients from a selfish perspective, but I want to be able to continue to have these relationships with all of the clients. And so therefore, then I kind of went, well, maybe we could do two, maybe we could open another one. And that jump from one to two was like, it's literally like splitting yourself in two, because you still haven't got any of the structure. You haven't got the people around you to do it. It wasn't generating any profit at this point. We were just barely covering costs and, the basics. So the jump kind of from one to two, but was more so wanting to be able to service who we had. And it did that because we opened in a location. We were like, well, where are our clients? And a lot of our clients were in this location, maybe 4 or 5 kilometers from the first studio. So we thought, okay, that would be a great spot. And a building came up, and not too much thought went into the look or the feel of, so it wasn't a strategy. It wasn't like, oh, we have a brand now, because we didn't. Even, okay, we had a name and we had a logo, but branding is so much more than just that. So we didn't have any of that. So that went from one to two. Then I think there was a bit of traction in terms of marketing and social media, and more people being interested in it, and more, maybe then, I mean, that was kind of 2012, then a couple more studios coming up, and then spaces were starting to kind of drop into my lap. So I had, maybe be it clients or people just saying, oh, there's an amazing space. I think a studio would do really well down here. So that's kind of where the third one came from. And then the growth came, and it came pretty quickly and fast moving. And I think what was interesting about that time, this is all before the pandemic, because we at one point had 8 studios. So there was a kind of a big growth. And I felt, and this is again, this honest conversation, I felt, okay, it's great. There's good growth, but there isn't much stability underneath. I felt quite vulnerable actually as a business owner, because I was like, it's really just me, my idea, my philosophy. And now I've got loads of teachers, I've got loads of sites, I've got loads of locations, but I don't really feel very supported. And I don't really feel like my ethos is filtering down through the team. And it was at that time when, and I don't know if you saw this, I'm sure you did, Nick, all of a sudden everybody wanted to become a Pilates teacher, and really quickly. So you had the evolution of like the Instagram style Pilates teacher, which was like, I'm just going to do a quick weekend course over here. I'm going to put it up on my social media. Now I'm a Pilates teacher. And this teacher that, on paper, good, but with nothing kind of going on underneath it, not an understanding of the deeper work.
How did you go then from, your 8 studios, you decided to cut it back a little bit? That must have been tricky. It's hard, isn't it? You clearly have a growth mentality, but we all have points in our career, I certainly have it as well, where you're like, there's too much. There's just one of me. And like you said, you're so deep with your ethos. I guess you've had to really think about how you structure the team. It's something that I'm finding a challenge at the moment. How do you structure the team as you grow the studios? How did that kind of come about? What was that period like for you?
Yeah, do you know what? It was like, when I look back now, I think I'm so grateful for it. At the time, I wasn't grateful, because it was a bit of my personal circumstances with myself and my husband, ex-husband, that was changing. I had my 3 girls I had to take care of. We had to kind of put on a brave face in front of the business, and it was really not a great situation. And then the pandemic came, and it was almost like, I think now, if I can look, someone came in and just pressed the reset button in my life, and they went, there you go. You're going to take a little pause and just check in. Of course, that's not what I felt. I went, oh my God, the pandemic. Are you joking me? What am I going to do? I've got landlords, I have staff, I have clients. What is going on here? It was this complete stall. So once that happened, once, we got the news, the country's going into lockdown. And it's interesting, Nick, because I like to take credit for this. I know I can't, but I'm going to, anyway, I'm like, I was the first person to be on Zoom because I had used Zoom back in 2017 through my Franklin method, actually. I was like, oh, this is an amazing tool, Zoom. Like, we can do education things through it. So once the government said, okay, we're locking down, everyone's locking in. I was like, well, let's just get on Zoom. And my team were like, what's Zoom? And I'm like, you're gonna love it. So within a day, we had, we sent out a mail and we went, guys, okay, obviously the studios are closed. We're gonna go online and because we're a reformer Pilates studio. So how do so we went, we're taking the reformer onto the mat. We're going back to the basics. Mat work was part of the original repertoire. So here we go. So we did that, and it was unbelievable, Nick. I think I'm going to say it saved me on an emotional basis. It saved me obviously on a financial basis. It was just so powerful what that gave me, because we had clients, like we had 300 people in Zoom classes all day long. It was absolutely amazing, and I got to work with some of my team who were happy to still stay on board, and we were able to still continue to connect, and it gave me a purpose during a time that was really dark. It was really challenging, but to know I had to get up every morning at 6 o'clock and turn on my camera with a big smile on my face and be like, hi guys, let's do this, and do the workout with them as well. I was never in such good shape. I was ripped. I was
Same.
like, yeah,
Same.
yeah,
I
everyone
like,
loves
because of
the
course, when we
body.
teach classes, I'm stood at the front just pointing at everyone, really. Whereas on
Yeah,
Zoom, you were like,
yeah,
well, I'm going to do it with you.
yeah,
So,
exactly,
8 mat
exactly.
classes a day. As
Yeah,
you've grown the
exactly.
studios, Milena, how has it been to grow your team and grow your leadership style?
So it's funny, it's changed. My leadership style and my team, the way I has literally changed all the way. It's probably done a complete 180. And, I learned in business, and it's just how it is. So it's not a pity party story, but as a business owner, you're going to get burned. You're going to get burned by your staff. You're loyal, and you give so much, and people want to do their own thing. And it used to really hurt my feelings, like hurt my soul, when staff would leave to open up their own gigs, and I would like take it so personally. And, I'd be like, oh my God, but I invested so much time. And, now I'm like, I'm completely the opposite. I'm like, I'm expecting it. I'm encouraging it. I run my business knowing the evolution of a Pilates teacher, and I just hold really strong boundaries around myself. I'm going, look, whatever, while you're in the Platinum family, we're going to give you the best of Pilates education. We bring over educators. Diane regularly comes over to deliver her incredible work with the team, as well as lots of other really cool educators. So we give our team as many opportunities as we can for education, learning. And then my expectation is, whilst working with us, then that we're all going to provide the very best to the clients. And then, once somebody decides that Platinum's not for them anymore, that's fine. And I understand that there's going to be a continuous evolution of my team. So I run the business with that in mind.
That's difficult, isn't it? Because I've been in that situation before. It's interesting hearing you say that, because it is hard. We also have Diane. We also bring educators. We do lots of CPD with our teachers. Once you've been let into the world that you've been let into, you want everyone to have as much of that awareness as possible, don't you? But it is hard when someone goes off and opens. And I guess you try and be, like you said, grown up about it and respectful. And like you said, boundaries. And you also hope that they will do the same, that they will do something with respect. I respect people where I can see the work they've put in. They don't just try and copy you. You're never going to be successful if you copy somebody else. But I really respect when someone goes and runs a retreat. Even one of our teachers, they run a retreat. I'll happily even promote it to our clients if I can see the amount of work that's gone into their thought process, what they're doing, how they're bringing it together. But it is hard sometimes, isn't it? There's definitely stories, I'm sure you've got them too, where you're like, that was not, you did not handle that with the respect to me that I had given you.
Yeah, exactly. And do you know what, Nick? I think as well, I hold my hand up and say I didn't handle things with respect. I think it's really important to check in with yourself as well, because I'm as human as the next person. And so therefore I know I've made so many mistakes, over the years, and that's okay. I regret certain things. I do things differently. But I think one of the things that changed, I think, my experience within my business. I have now got a team of people around me. I'm so lucky and I'm so grateful to work with them. They're better than me. I now have team members, my brand manager, I have somebody, in accounts, I have an operator, and they're just better at doing the things that they do than I am. And I know what I'm good at. I know that I am a good educator, and I know that I am good with people. but I'm not good at lots of other things. So having people, within my team that actually they inspire me has allowed me to I feel really comfortable in my business. I feel really comfortable in the shoes that I'm in at the moment.
I think as you expand into multiple locations, it is about thinking how you expand that kind of management structure and who do you need. And then you've got the challenge where maybe your business isn't quite big enough to justify the spend, but it's too big for you to do it all. That's a tricky place, isn't there? Like there's some argument to say, someone said to me, if you decide on 2 studios, you have to decide on 4 or 5 because then you'll have the team you need, which I think is an interesting point. Where did you first go, like in terms of that management structure? Where did you first look at expanding that? Do you have someone across all of the studios? Because one of my questions is around that kind of client experience and how you bring that, you said that was a challenge before, how you bring it in your, the consistency across all the locations.
I was lucky enough to be able to have an experience in Ireland. There's an organization called Going for Growth, and it is funded. And the whole idea, in the sense of, it's about kind of supporting women in business. And somebody put me forward for it, and I was accepted onto the program. And it's nothing to do with this industry. In fact, it's quite the opposite. You get put on a round table with a mentor and a bunch of other experts in their field, but all completely different industries. And you met up once a month, and it was like a mentorship program that allowed you to be able to go into a room in a safe space and talk about your business and be like, I don't know what I'm doing. What do you think? You could soundboard. And that provided me with a whole different outlook. I don't know if you want to use the word wellness expert. I knew a lot in wellness, but I didn't know anything about running business. So that gave me a totally different take and a view on, oh wow, actually you need other people around you. So, exactly like you said, I felt like there was that line of kind of going, well, gosh, am I going to do it all on my own, or am I going to trust some key people that can help me on this journey? And I think letting go of the reins is really important. Nobody is going to do things the way that you absolutely want it done. Like if you're very fixed in your thinking, which I was, has to be done like this, it has to look like this, that can kind of restrict you a little bit. Whereas if you open up to looking at things from a different perspective, there are probably people on your team, Nick. There are probably people that are right there under your nose, that could help you grow or run a business with that, and I think that's where I started to kind of realize, I was like, wow, I've got all these amazing people, many of them whom are around me. And it's interesting because the brand manager who does all of the beautiful social media and all of that, she's a Pilates teacher, Victoria, and she's a Polestar certified Pilates teacher, but she's working in the branding and marketing end of the business. But she has the understanding and the feel for what it's all about. So having to talk brand with her, she gets it. And, my operator is somebody who's done Pilates for a long time. So I don't know whether I chose or it chose me. That's the element of how my business is working. And it seems to be working really well. And then we outsource the stuff that we can't do in terms of, like SEO and digital and, all the other bits and pieces.
That's really interesting because I think, I'm at my 3rd studio. You realize, don't you? I don't know if it's with every studio. Maybe it would have had a 4th one. Maybe it'd have to evolve again. But definitely coming to 3, it's like the team structure has to shift a little bit. And how do you bring in the right people? And you're absolutely right. I think the people who've done really well from us, they have bought into what we're about, our ethos. You can tell your brand manager there is not a marketing campaign but my background is marketing. There's not a marketing campaign that I put together where one of your images is not on my mood board. She does a fabulous job. We're always lusting after, if those of you who've not followed Platinum, follow your social. It is such an inspiration because it is a challenge to bring the depth that you shared, the passion in that depth. It's hard to bring that through in social. In a world that is dominated by aesthetically, you need to look a certain way. Harder is always better. The softness, the slowing down, the bits that sometimes we can find uncomfortable, but that change our lives. It's hard to bring that forwards. And I think, that's why now understanding your story, no wonder your stuff is coming through to me, because that's what you do. You've got to visually capture someone's desires and dreams, but in a way that you can hopefully also reflect on. You don't need to be a skinny person in a crop top to do this, which is challenging because that's the sort of imagery that drives our industry, isn't it? Because people have that desire perhaps to be there. But that isn't about feeling good in their bodies necessarily. You don't have to look like that. Those people might not even feel good. I want people to feel good in themselves. And like you said, once you understand the connections in the body, we're often unraveling pain, tensions. Diane is also comes and works with us and is a mentor of mine. You know, she's all talking about unraveling people's sort of stresses and worries and from that place. So that must have been a challenge to bring that to life, but no wonder it's a teacher. I can really understand that.
I think the thing is, I think you said it there, I'd love to wear a crop top. I'm sorry, I'm just not going to. I'm just, my body doesn't, nobody needs to see that. But I feel like when I move or when my teachers move, and anyone on our social media, they will either be a client, a very long-term client, as in they've done an awful lot, or they'll be one of our team members. So we don't bring in anybody that isn't a part of the platinum journey to put onto social media. And the other thing is that, exactly as you said, it's not about the aesthetic. I'll often say to Victoria, I'll say, oh, that picture hurts my eyes looking at it, because I can see that that's a fabricated picture, and it'd be something like someone in a picture and their hands would be like this. And I'm like, oh, I'm like, no, I can't look at that any longer, because when you know what it feels like in the body, and you look at something visually, and it's probably, Nick, because of your extensive background, when you look at those photos, you're probably connecting with them because you're seeing full body integration. You're seeing that the force is being distributed equally in the person's lunge. You're seeing real balance, because if in that shoot at that moment in time, they're being cued as if they're being cued in class. So it's not like, okay, hold your hands up, sit down a little deeper, turn your head this way. It's not, they're not being manually driven into position. They're actually being taught, and then that teaching is being captured at that moment in time. So therefore, as a piece of content or something that looks like, it looks so polished, it looks so balanced, it looks so aesthetically and visually kind, because it actually is.
It's a real reflection of what you're doing. And I think I can see that and it comes to life. Do you feel now the industry has exploded and now there's lots of studios? I mean, literally in my city, which is much smaller than Dublin, every month there's a new one. Do you feel pressure to keep staying at the top? Like, do you and your brand manager, do you feel even on social, it's like, right, I see, I mean, like I said, I love your content. Let's talk about breaking down exercises. Let's have an interview about this. Is that part of what drives that? It's like, how do we stay at the top of this? Or does it come from a different place?
I think, Nick, it comes from a different place. Of course, if a studio opens on my doorstep, I go, oh God, here we go. Because of course I'm worried in the sense of, for a moment, are my clients going to go? For me, it comes and it goes again. I just go, okay, back to business, Mel, do what you do. And for me, I'm not so interested in that. Like my girls, they're older now. I've kind of like late teens and into their early 20s. And they're like, oh, mom, you got to get on TikTok. You got to do this trend. You got to do this sound. And I go, okay, no, I'm okay, thanks. Because for me, Instagram, etc., that's wallpaper. That's like it's just like wallpaper. This fashion is in this month, and next it'll be a different style next month. And I feel like that's very much a what's on the outside. But when a client walks in the door, the experience that they have is so much more important than that. So my focus is not on, yes, I want it to look and feel, and I want, my Instagram to grow, and I want us to have a good placement when someone Googles, Pilates. That's of course the competitive edge in business. But what I really want to have is that every client and customer that comes into my business has an experience where they feel welcomed, they feel safe, they feel like the money that they've invested and the time that they've invested, it was well spent, and that they want to come back. I want them to see that we have cleaned the studios immaculately. The bathrooms are clean. Everything is presentable. To me, that's where I feel pressure to stay. It's not to stay ahead. It's what our foundation was. When our teachers come on board, I say to them, like, first day on the job, the most important piece of Pilates equipment in this studio is the Hoover and the mop. This place has to be immaculate for clients to have a good experience in. And I'm sure they're looking at me going, okay, that's, ridiculous, but it's true. You're right. There are studios opening up. And I think the fact that there's so many studios now are offering teacher training. And that gives me the ick, because I just feel like, very different than the education, Nick, that you guys have gone at. You're running apprenticeship type mentorship, long-term programs, which is really what Pilates education should be about, like Polestar. Whereas, go and do a weekend course and then your Pilates teacher, or even a couple of weekends without any prerequisites, without any, having done anything before. People, that would go on a course having never even been on a reformer before, and then they're a Pilates teacher. I'm not into it. And often people will say, oh, well, that's very judgmental. And I say, yeah, I am judging it because it's not right and it's not good for the industry. And I want to do the best for my teachers and for my clients and for the industry, even to say, Nick, to professionalize the industry. So many people, I feel now I'm hearing, oh, I'm working in banking and I think I'll do a course so that I can just do a bit of Pilates on the side. And I'm like, on the side of, like, you're either in the industry or you're not, So I work really hard, and part of my growth process will be around trying to professionalize the industry a little bit, where people can have a great career in the Pilates industry.
Well, I was going to ask you because you've been doing, you've been in this world longer than most and you'll have seen the changes. And I think a big change is around the prolific nature of anyone. I mean, literally anyone can create a course. A person who's not even a teacher can technically run a course and give you a certificate and you'll be insurable. I mean, it is bonkers. It goes back to something you talked about earlier, which is the lack of regulation. It's been a regular topic that's come up on these conversations. It's a tricky one to solve. If someone said tomorrow, Milena, this is your responsibility now. You are going to work on professionalizing the industry, creating some accreditation. Where do we go with that? Because I think the people who treat this as a profession, who've done a lot of trainings, who spend a lot of time in this, who are passionate about it, and it's really why I've created the podcast, a big part of it. We're all a little frustrated that therefore, like you said, I mean, someone told me in an interview the other day, there is a 4-hour course you can do and you're qualified as a reformer teacher at the end of 4 hours, which is mental. What do we do? Is there, I don't even know if there is a solution other than maybe just talking about it and making people aware of it. Have you had thoughts on this?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I don't know what we do or don't know what can be done. I mean, in the States, for example, you've got the National Certification Program, which was the PMA at one point, which is brilliant because obviously it's an issue there as well. And they're trying to create all of these minimum standards. If I had a wand or if I was given that job, here you go, Mel, your new job is to create these sort of the minimum entry for becoming a Pilates teacher. I would be like, well, I feel like it should be a minimum 200 hours on the reformer yourself first, body move, on the reformer, and signed off, like for example, with Polestar in the old days. And I remember, and I'm sorry, I say in the old days, I haven't trained a Polestar for a long time. I'm sure it's still the same, but I remember my logbook, and trekking over and back to London. There was hundreds of hours that had to be signed by the educators and the mentors. And I remember at one point thinking, oh, I'll never get this done. But, slowly but surely getting all my signatures and looking back and being able to look back on that and go, wow, I really worked hard during that process to become comprehensively trained. So I would say that you gotta, I think there would be a minimum number of hours yourself personally that you've actually gone on that journey. And then the actual courses themselves, they have to have more depth than just the exercises. And I see it where people come in for auditions, and I've kind of stopped auditioning the teachers because I feel like a lot of the time it's a bit of a waste of time unless somebody came with one of the someone going went on Polestar certified or one of the qualifications that I rated, because I feel like a lot of the courses are just teaching students exercises. They learn the exercises on the reformer without any deeper understanding of breaking it down. What's that exercise for? Why are you doing it? What's happening? It's just like, okay, and now we're going to do footwork, and now we're going to do bridging, and now we're going to, almost like a kind of a repertoire. So that would be the other thing I would say, that the courses themselves need to have a much bigger emphasis and focus on, nervous system, neuromuscular system, bone rhythms, all the other systems. And actually the exercises, I say this and again, you can judge me now. I don't care what the exercises are. It's like, if somebody came in and said, oh, here's my class plan. And I'm like, if I look at the plan doesn't mean anything unless it's taught from a place of understanding those movements, not exercise, but movements.
I've definitely had that when I would audition someone and I'd say, "So tell me why you would give this to someone. What's the benefit in this exercise?" And they're like, "Don't know." They just haven't ever been taught that depth. And you think, well, how can you choose exercises for somebody then? Because Pilates is this deeper system. It's an ethos, it's a system. And I think with the knowledge we have now, like you have gained from your trainings, I've done some similar trainings, you realize how far it can go, away from the pure classical stuff. Like we've got a lot more science knowledge now, fascia knowledge, just movement integration, really, which I think is such an important part of it. So it is interesting. And it's a challenge, isn't it, to keep bringing in teachers as you expand your business that will have that depth. I'd like to touch upon you've been exploring the impact of low impact exercise and how that affects mood. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that because you see people, they don't just talk about their backs better or their knees better. They do talk about they feel happier. I have a client, I phrase her all the time. She said, I came for my bad back and I stayed for my mental health. Did that kind of drive you into looking into this a bit more?
Yeah, it was. So obviously I started my degree in psychology and it was amazing. It's the most interesting study, most interesting thing I've ever studied because it's so vast. And of course, psychology, the study of human behavior, there was behavioral science, there was neuroscience, there was all sorts of different elements. And then also there was the study of research. So I probably one of the biggest things that I learned in my degree was, how to critically evaluate papers, how to understand when a paper comes out. It's not just, oh, is this going to make a headline? Or if I read it and I read into it, can I actually critically evaluate it enough for me to be able to say, well, actually, that doesn't really prove anything. So when it came time then to put forward some proposals for my thesis, I was like, I'm loving the real understanding that I learned about the nervous system. I'm loving this, understanding how much the body and mind are one. It's not even that they're connected. It's that they are one. It's all the same. So it makes total and utter sense that I look into the field. And because of ethics and because of obviously I'm a business owner of a reformer Pilates studio, when I went to propose in my thesis, they were like, well, ethically, are you doing it so that you're able to say, oh, look, I was able to show that reformer Pilates. So they were like, you probably want to broaden the scope. So I said, okay, well, let's look at low impact exercise, which Pilates is, and et cetera, et cetera. So I got all my sign off, and then I was time to then delve into the research. And yeah, in all honesty, Nick, there's none. It's so limited because of all of the varieties, because of everything that can be a point of difference. It's really, really hard to focus on. But what I did find was very much around mood and how do you actually study mood? How can you record it and how can you actually test and measure it? And of course, you've got all these psychological scales which are validated. And so I spent a lot of time looking through those. And one of the biggest impacts in terms of low impact exercise was on mood, was on people's kind of their level of life satisfaction, their self kind of connection, their happiness with themselves. I'm not going to say that it opened my eyes because any of us that are in this industry, we intuitively know that this work is good for people. We just haven't got the scientific piece of paper beside us to say, here, it says it here. But we know because we have human experience and clients report feeling better. Their pain goes away. They're able to do things they weren't able to do. They can run marathons now. They can swing their golf clubs. They can sleep better. So all of these outcomes that are measurable through self-reporting. And so this kind of allowed me to delve really deeply into that.
I think, as you said, this is stuff we're seeing all the time, but it's hard to prove it. So it's great that you're doing that. What's next for you and what's next for Platinum?
What's next? I think I'm at a place where I'm really content actually right now. I've finished my degree and I was like toying with a master's and I was like, what's next? And I kind of said, well, I'll just settle down and enjoy the summer with my girls. But in terms of what's next for Platinum, I mean, I still feel there's so much to do. It's like it's not you're never there. And one of the lovely pieces of work that we have done this year is very much internal. It's kind of we've done a lot of work around internal branding and working with our team on, values and beliefs and really really connecting a little bit more to the center. What I really wanted was, all those great things that we say about ourselves advertising outwards, our branding, our marketing, are my team all fully connected to those? And I suppose I felt it was nice to be able to, I really, I believe in myself now, which I don't think I always did. A lot of the time, my team believed in me more than I believed in myself. But now I'm really, content in sitting with myself and saying, this business that we have built together and that this team around us, and it's really important to me that they feel connected to that. We've spent this whole year kind of working on that. There's always spaces popping up and opportunities to kind of expand and grow, and I think that's definitely on the cards. One of the challenges with that is I love really interesting buildings. I don't want to just open up a studio in a shopping center or in an office blocks.
Your buildings are stunning. I have to come and go on a Platinum Pilates tour. I mean, they are. It's amazing to see the transformation you turn these buildings into studios.
Every one of them has an amazing story. There's a historical element to each and every one of them, from whether it's the old church to Hat Street was, I don't know if you ever spent any time in Dublin, that was the old pod, the nightclub. And then before that, it was one of the very, very old train stations. So it's just, there's so much history. And I suppose going back to the start where you were talking about my mom and my dad, and I do feel very connected to history, that I love that. I love a story.
So to end our chat today, because honestly, I could talk to you for another hour. I just have enjoyed our chat so much. I'd like to end with just a few little quick fire questions, Milena. So what was the most influential piece of advice you've been given, and by who?
It's interesting because I have been a collector of advice, but I think, really getting to dig deeper, to go under, to question, not to just accept things at face value. And I think I was told that by many people. I think, like I said, Eric Franklin was a brilliant mentor, but even some of my kind of earlier Pilates educators, Diane, who was on your podcast, and Liz, another educator at Polestar, and even earlier years, even than that, Alistair and Joanne, I think, was one of the very, very first educators that I had. And they were all about questioning. Just because somebody tells you something with conviction doesn't mean it's the case. Don't be afraid to just, ask a little more and dig a little bit deeper. And also don't be afraid to say, I don't understand. I don't know. It's okay to actually admit that. I think some of us are a bit afraid to kind of be like, I don't want to sound stupid here, but like, I literally don't know what you're talking about. That to me is great advice.
I give that advice to teachers often. You get clients coming in and they've got some sort of condition you've never heard of in your life. And you Google it and you still don't really understand it, but they come in. And I just say to the teachers, just start off with this client saying, I'm not an expert, but I'm here to learn. And if we can work together, we can work together on this. It's just take the pressure off, because I think sometimes people can think that, yeah, you need to know it all, which is not the case at all. So if you could go back and give your younger self some advice, Milena, what would that be?
Oh, I would say this. I would say start by knowing the nervous system. Start there. That would be like the place you want to become a student and you want to learn about human movement, interaction, forget bones, forget muscles, forget biomechanics, literally pare it right back and learn about the nervous system, learn about the intricacies of it, because I think it took me probably 25 years to get back to that place. And I would also say, don't be afraid of change. Every time something rough is coming at you, I promise you, Milena, out the other side of it, so many amazing things are going to come, and just don't be afraid. And which, it's easy in hindsight to say that, but I would tell her that don't be afraid. Change is always going to be the best thing that ever happens.
What has been the most profound gift that you've been given from Pilates?
I think just awareness. I think, being given the gift of being shown what you don't know. Yeah, here's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't know, and you're going to need to go and find out. I think it has changed me on a professional level. It's changed me on a personal level. It's allowed me to be a better mom. It's allowed me to be a better friend, because I think when you become aware of yourself, you actually at some point become aware of your impact on everybody around you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for your time today. I've loved your honesty. I've loved so much of what you've shared, both as a studio owner, as a teacher, as a client, as an ongoing student of this work. So thank you so much for your time. I know we've tried to arrange this so many times. I know how busy you are, and I'm really grateful. I know so many people will get so much out of our conversation today. So thank you.
Oh, well, I'm so glad. And thank you so much. I really appreciate you asking me to be part of this. It was great to chat with you.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I'm really grateful that you're here and I'm loving building this community with you all. Make sure you click the follow button so you don't miss an episode. New ones come out every Monday. And if you found today's content helpful, it would mean a lot if you left a 5-star review, or even better, shared it with someone you think would enjoy it too. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next week.